All right, welcome in, everybody. It's the Important Nonsense Podcast, 32 teams in 32 days. Today, the Denver Broncos, Steve Bonham, Neil Smith, Mike Manning. Guys, how you doing today? We got Denver. We got Neil's neck of the woods.
Raise the roof. Raise the roof. Let Russ cook. Let Russ cook, folks. Here we go.
The former stomping grounds of another great Manning.
So it begins. So it begins.
His kids are still here. They never left. They love it here.
Oh, it's great. It's good to hear.
So as we come to you, this is being recorded on July 27th. So if any of the information we're saying is out of date, that would be why. But it's the most up-to-date information we have. 12-team PPR, as always. 2 running back, 3 wide receiver and a flex, 2 wide receiver and a flex. However you want to work it, but it basically works out to all the same. So if you're using anything other than PPR, you'll have to adjust accordingly. But that's pretty much how we're going to jump into this. The jumping off point. Russ, the big news of the offseason, heading over from Seattle to the Broncos, taking over as starting quarterback there. It is the first above average quarterback, like you mentioned, Mike, since Peyton Manning. I mean, I don't think that's a real shot at Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater or the Brock Lobster. I think it's pretty much accurate.
But it is a shot at Trevor Siemian.
Yes,
since you
100%.
left him off. Okay.
Yeah, but you know what? We've already taken several shots at Trevor Siemian going back to the Bears episode. You can catch that from a couple days ago. If you want to go ahead and do that. But yes, so Wilson comes over. He's always among the league leaders in ADOT. You mentioned when he's healthy, you can pencil him in for around 4,000 passing yards, 400 rushing yards, 30 to 40 total touchdowns, and 10-ish interceptions. In 2019 and 2020, his averages were right in those lines. Total touchdowns was about 38 for the season. Rushing yardage was just over 400. Passing yardage was about 4,200. And the key there, 33.6 pass attempts per game through the 2019 and 2020 seasons. Last year, of course, he had the finger injury and the passing numbers were down, but 28.6 pass attempts per game. So he was down 5 whole pass attempts per game last season from the prior years, which would explain the drop-off. And you've mentioned here Nathaniel Hackett coming over as the head coach, coming over from Green Bay and the system they ran there. And obviously, we're not going to say that Russell Wilson is Aaron Rodgers. They're clearly 2 different quarterbacks with different skill sets, but under the 3 years with Hackett, the Packers had 34.5 pass attempts per game, which is a little above the gigantic numbers that Russ was putting up in the 2019 and 2020 seasons. So a ton of optimism all around. I've got him at 11. Neil, you've got him at 12. Mike, you've got him at QB 9. We all feel fairly confident he's a back-end QB 1, but what's really the ceiling here for Russell Wilson?
Oh, the absolute ceiling. It would probably be something along the lines of QB 6, maybe 5. For me, at least. The issue is he's going to run some, but I don't know that he'll ever get to the rushing floor that you would need to have to get into the top 4.
I mean, if you're looking at his entire career, which was spent in Seattle among the run-heaviest teams every single year, which didn't often involve him being the runner.
Right.
His rushing was mostly through scrambles and things along those lines when a play broke down because of his terrible offensive line. So throughout his entire career, he has never finished worse than a QB1. You can always just pencil him in to be. He has finished as QB1 before.
Oh, you mean top 12? I'm sorry, that even threw me off. You mean as a QB1 in the top 12?
Yeah, in the top 12.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, yeah, sorry. That was poorly worded.
That threw me, and I'm like, people listening to this that might need some.
Yeah,
we're good. We clarified.
Yeah, so he has finished as like a top 12 quarterback every single year of his career, run heavy offense every year. So you pay this huge ransom for him. You're paying multiple first-round picks, the players, but I honestly don't think the players were that much of a cost. You're going to make him, as they said, a focal point of the offense. Yeah, well, duh. So I think he can go as high as a top. I'll even say maybe he can be QB3. Because if we don't know what this offense is exactly going to look like, because we don't actually know if Hackett was the one calling the plays in Green Bay or if it was LaFleur. So I think that if Hackett does look at his offense and say that, hey, this is Russell Wilson, this is the best quarterback that this Denver Broncos team has seen in forever, let's let him sling it. And let Russ cook will actually become a reality.
Right.
And his weapons aren't bad, that's for sure.
I'd argue they're about on par with what he's used to dealing with. Should be largely a lateral thing.
In Seattle, we were looking at essentially his floor with the hopes of upside.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say, too, is, like, to Neil's point, what we have locked in as our top 5, those are like the Konami code guys, like the rushers, the guys you think is the standalone rushing quarterbacks. So last year, points per game basis, you had Josh Allen, number 1, obviously. Then Justin Herbert, who was actually 10th in rushing yards among QBs, but it was only 302. We're talking about Russell Wilson, when given the opportunity, when throwing the ball more, when scrambling more, has averaged over 400 rushing yards. That's more than what Mahomes was doing last year. Mahomes finished top 5. Justin Herbert finished top 5. Kyler Murray finished top 5. Even Tom Brady finished top 5. Now, you would have to put up gigantic numbers like Brady did to stand in the pocket and put up top 5 numbers. But I think absolutely, as long as he hits these averages he has in the past, when given the opportunity to throw the ball, Russell Wilson could easily have a top 5 season. He's somebody that I would definitely be targeting in the back end. That's why I was asking what we saw as the ceiling, just because I don't like drafting players at their ceiling.
Right.
I tend to rank them slightly below that. I'd rather get them as more of a value. So I don't see like just being in the top 10 or right around the top 12 as the ceiling for Russell Wilson. I think he could have top 5 upside.
It's a good way to put it. Whatever anyone thinks of any individual thinks of what the ceiling actually is, it's not where you have to draft him. Is the takeaway.
Yeah. The only time I ever draft a player at their ceiling is in the top 5.
Right.
That's it. If they're a top 5 player at the position, they literally can't go higher than that. So have to draft them at the ceiling. But otherwise, I'm looking for a value. All right. Anything else on Russ before we move on?
The flippant response of they didn't move all this capital to not utilize him and go back to the old Seattle offense of Russ, you're going to hand that ball up. They're not doing that. We didn't spend all this capital. So he's going to get his opportunities to throw.
Let's move on to running back. So you've got the Williams-Gordon tandem back, which is even more interesting to me this season than it was last season. So we talked about this a lot. Everybody wanted to immediately say Melvin Gordon was dead and anoint Javonte Williams as the guy. I talked about it last season. I've never been a believer in Javonte Williams. He's not bad. I just don't think he's the elite prospect that everybody has him penciled in as. He was my number 4 rookie running back in last year's class. Player Profiler has him comped to Noshawn Moreno, who, again,
played for the Broncos.
Good running back. Nothing wrong with Noshawn Moreno. Top 20 seasons in fantasy, but he's not elite. He's not a top-end guy that I'm going to reach for. Javonte Williams did have, 3 weeks last year where he had top 5 production when Melvin Gordon was out because he literally had the entire workload all to himself. That's literally your best case scenario, is that every other running back in the backfield is gone and 100% of the snaps go to Javonte Williams and his body survives that. And then he's a top 5 running back. Congratulations, you did it. But until that happens, which won't happen, this should be a committee. Also, I love the narrative, and I hate narrative analysis, but I love the narrative of Russ coming in and Melvin Gordon and him being college roommates and college teammates and hanging out, and they hang out all the time. They still talk and chat, and now they wanted to get back together, and Russ was one of the ones recruiting Melvin to come back and re-sign. Love that storyline. Fantastic. It means literally nothing to anything. But I just love that that's a story.
You talking to Mike Kliss? Is that like I hear that on the radio every other day? You talking to Mike Kliss out here? That's your source?
I had not even heard that until he just mentioned it.
Oh, it's the most narrative.
I had
of
not
narratives.
noticed
It's fantastic.
It's the most narrative-y of narratives I've ever that has ever narratived. It's fantastic.
But it's just the idea that Melvin Gordon will somehow be the favored running back in the backfield because Russ already has the pre-existing connection with him, and he's not as familiar with Javonte Williams, which again is ludicrous. But I just, to me, it's still the similar thing to what we had last year. It's a 50-50 split. They're going to have roughly the same job and do roughly the same amount of work, but Gordon is the guy that you can get for significantly cheaper.
Do you want to just go through the fine stats on it too, since we've taken the time to compile them? So, I mean, when you say 50-50 split, you're talking about, and thank you, Mike, for pulling this. It was last year, 14.5 touches per game for Javonte. 14.4 touches for Melvin Gordon when both were on the field together. So it doesn't really get much more 50-50 than this. So they literally shared the workload. And Steve, you mentioned it. In the one game where Gordon wasn't able to go, Javonte Williams saw 29 touches, 178 yards, and a touchdown. And everybody got all excited on the internet. And we're just all they all went into their full wait till next year conversation was immediately what happened. And well, now we're at next year. But last year, Melvin Gordon he's had nearly 1,800 touches since entering the NFL. He's 29. So that's where a lot of folks, I think, are saying, okay, well, the cliff is coming for Melvin Gordon.
Sure.
I'm not debating that with you. We could have that conversation if you want about running backs post 30 and what historically happens with that. But I want to point out a couple things. That's not this year. And he's only 29 this year. And yes, he's had 1,800 touches, and he's done a lot. He's got a lot of miles on the body, especially considering his college career when you factor that in. But that's the nice thing about this is I don't think anything's going to change. They brought Melvin Gordon back for a reason. He also wanted to be back after he couldn't get the big money contract from the Ravens, but that was never going to happen anyway. So when that got taken off the table, he was offered a fair deal to come back here and try and go to the playoffs and play in a system he knows. And frankly, the coaching staff loves him out here because he does everything they ask him to. And I hate to tell people this. I don't know if they're just not paying attention, but the Broncos don't care about your fantasy football team.
Yeah.
And they don't care about your dynasty draft of Javonte Williams, because the people that I see being the loudest about the free Javonte Williams people, these are the same people that last year were pounding the table for him in dynasty. And I was sitting here saying, fine, but you're going to be waiting because they're not just going to turn the keys over to Javonte Williams and say, go get it, kid. You're our guy. You're going to do 100% of the job. That's not this coaching staff. That's not this organization. They're interested in winning football games to try and go to the playoffs, to try and win the division and hopefully go to a Super Bowl. That's what they're interested in. And through that lens, the re-signing of Melvin Gordon is a genius move. It is a brilliant idea to bring him in and split this job up. So I don't think they have any interest at the leadership and coaching staff level of making Javonte Williams be the guy.
Yeah, we've mentioned a couple times already Hackett coming in from the Matt LaFleur tree of even Derrick Henry is in a running back committee. So
he couldn't figure out the picture.
Yeah, it's the same thing. So Williams and Gordon, this will still be a committee. I think it probably is 60-40 Javonte, which is why I lean Javonte Williams. But again, I do all the projections, and as I did the projections, even with the full workload before Melvin Gordon re-signed, and it was just the Javonte Williams show, I had him as RB11. That's where I had him with the entire workload in Denver was RB11. And in the ECR, he's RB12 with Melvin Gordon there. In ADP, he's RB9. Mm-hmm. He's going as a top 10 running back off the board right now when he shares a job. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. And Mike, you're higher on him than we are, but I can't fault you for it. You've got him at least in RB2 territory.
I think he is a high-end RB2 because of
the
guys that you see in that range of the like round 3-ish guys that you're going to be drafting, round 2, round 3 guys. There's some that have like you see a future where they have RB, like top 5 RB outcomes. Mm-hmm. And Javonte has that. He showed whenever he got the workload that he could take it, and it was that was the best performance any Denver Bronco offensive player had all of last season. And I don't think there's much debate about that.
Right.
Not a high
how
bar.
terrible that offense was. Yes, he by far was better than any other that game alone. So you're looking at Javonte. He's on a better offense now because you have Russell Wilson behind center instead of Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater. He's going to get more of the receiving work than he even did last year, where he also led the team in the backfield in terms of receiving work. And the goal line and red zone type situation was about a split. So if you do look at it as the upside of, say that he does get more of the red zone work, a little bit more of the red zone or goal line work, he has even more of the receiving work than he did last year. He's the lead back instead. I think that just this upside of his is going to be really appealing. But there was also the problem was in the beginning when Gordon wasn't there, his ADP was insane. Mm-hmm. He was going as like RB2 or pick number 2 even, which was like Jonathan Taylor and then Christian McCaffrey or Javonte Williams, which was ridiculous. Mm-hmm. So I think that going back to a RB2 range, mid to high, is a good spot for him.
And even then, I think it's more about like what you're saying, upside, because the guys, he's at RB9, which I still think is ridiculous. But the guys going right behind him in ADP are Kamara, Chubb, Fournette, Aaron Jones, Saquon Barkley, James Conner. It's all the old vets who, there's the question marks of how much do they have left in the tank. So people are taking the shot on the rook or the second year player, the younger player who has the potential, like you're saying, to be top 5, whereas those guys are more of the safe floor.
Yeah, and even all those guys have questions of some sort. Kamara with his suspension, Connor with his health. There's going to be questions once you hit that RB2 range for every single one.
Fournette with his weight, apparently.
Weight and age.
Weight there. And then not weight, and then head case, and then Mm-hmm. So just a lot going on. But yes.
I'll just say this, and then I'll leave it alone for the entire position. We just talked about drafting players at their ceiling. Mm-hmm. Javonte Williams is
foreshadowing.
Is exactly that, except for me, it's past his ceiling, and we've gone through the ceiling into the attic. Right. And I'm terrified of it. And I said this last year, and I want to put a fine point on it because I think nothing has changed. Last year, I said Javonte Williams was being overdrafted and overvalued, and Melvin Gordon was being criminally undervalued and was frankly a steal. And I don't think anything has changed. You could cross off that analysis from 2021, write 2022 on it, and it's the exact same advice I'm going to give. Javonte Williams is being way overvalued, and Melvin Gordon is being, I think, criminally undervalued for what you'll actually likely get for what you have to invest. So that's the way I view it.
Like I said, you and me both have him at RB19. Mike has him at 13. ECR is 12. And that's, even then, we're talking RB2 range altogether. So I'm fine with that. That's tier breaks and stuff in there too. So that's fine. And then we all have Melvin Gordon basically the same.
Right.
34, 33, 36.
ECR, same thing. I didn't even bother to pull it because it's in the same range.
And ADP right now for Melvin Gordon is running back 35. Mm-hmm. So we're all saying take him slightly ahead of the ADP and enjoy it. That's basically what it is. Wide receiver. This is the fun one.
This is the fun one.
It's always it's going to be the interesting one, that's for sure.
Courtland Sutton. Can it finally happen? I mean, dare to dream, right? I would love it if this was finally the year for Courtland Sutton.
My dynasty teams would too.
Yes, he's being compared to Cooper Kupp, basically this year's Cooper Kupp, the mid-round wide receiver with a chance to be a wide receiver one. I would absolutely agree with that. The chance to be the number one wide receiver on his team and jump into the top 12 in PPR, given the opportunity. The talent has been there. It's just been staying on the field and then having a quarterback that can accurately get him the ball. Those have been the issues for Courtland Sutton. Weeks 1 through 7, 14.8 PPR points per game last year. Led all Denver wide receivers, but then weeks 8 through 18, you couldn't start him. He was basically droppable. 4.6 PPR points per game, third among his team. His QB since entering the NFL, Case Keenum, Joe Flacco, Brandon Allen, Drew Lock, Teddy Bridgewater. That's sad. That's Allen Robinson level. I mean, that's up there. The only Denver pass catcher to reach 1,000 yards since 2016, which is a good nugget. Where are we on just Courtland Sutton specifically? Or do we want to do them all together? Because when you look at the depth chart, you've got Tim Patrick in the Z, Jerry Jeudy, of course, in the slot, who huge expectations for him, but those have been tempered a little bit. And then KJ Hamler dealing with injury, but he's another one of those like home run guys near the end of your draft to keep an eye on.
Right. I didn't write it here, but I will just say about Courtland Sutton. I did have one other nugget for him, which was you mentioned how in weeks 8 through 18 he was basically unstartable, and that's a true statement. He was just not useful at all. You want to know a fun fact about Courtland Sutton, even despite the fact that he had basically 10 weeks where you couldn't play him? For the season last year in 2021, he was wide receiver 7 in air yards.
Yeah.
So it wasn't for lack of involvement. And they were trying to get him the ball and sending him down the field. I will say I do think he was still nursing the knee a little bit for part of the year, and then he also got nicked up along the way, but that'll happen. It's pro football. But I do think it's fascinating that you could be 7th in air yards and be unusable for 10 weeks out of the season. And then this is where it does, that's a good stat, but where it does get a little narrative-y is, we mentioned Russell Wilson's deep ball and his ADOT. And then the paint by numbers you want to do is guy is accurate down the field. This guy was 7th in the league in air yards. Maybe we can actually get him the football, and that'll train. But that's where you cross the line from quantifiable statistic into paint by numbers narrative analysis. So it is interesting though. It is an interesting little thing.
Yeah, I mean that's what's causing him, I think, to be the belle of the ball in the Denver offense, is that people are painting this picture of, well, Sutton at least succeeded with the garbage fire of quarterbacks that we've mentioned, and Russell Wilson obviously is a huge upgrade over all of them, and his Sutton strength is deep ball. Wilson's strength has been the deep ball, so that's what's doing it. But I do think that at his ADP, I don't think I'm going to want to pay the price that somebody else in my league is going to want to pay.
Are you sure about that?
He has it ranked as such. We can go right into it. Like, I believe him.
I don't know. So here's what I'll say. So like you are correct. The deep ball with Sutton and the air yards, to your point, Neil, he was top 10 in air yards last year. The problem with that is the air yards just take into account the ball being thrown to the wide receiver, not accurately.
Right.
So yes, they hucked the ball 60 yards, but it was 10 yards beyond him being there. So, or 10 yards short of him being there, or 10 yards out of bounds. Like it being nowhere near him still counts for his air yards. So yes, he's used deep down the field. He just could never get the ball in his direction, which is why he was so unusable in the back half of the season. So if he can get it more accurately, if he can be effectively the home run shot, the Tyler Lockett that Russell Wilson has played with, and then the DK Metcalf, the volume guy underneath, is your Jerry Jeudy. I feel like that's kind of, if you want to make the comparison to the Seattle offense that Russ is coming over from. But the way we have it ranked, I have Sutton 21. Neil, you've got him at 18. Mike, you have him at 22. In ADP right now, he's going at wide receiver 25. That's why I was saying I don't know if you would really say you're not willing to take him at what someone's going to pay, because right now you're ahead of ADP on him.
I do think that any mock draft I have had in this offseason, somebody has like taken the dive several rounds before you would expect,
I guess.
So I guess that's more
to
from
me.
experience.
I think it's the opposite. I think he's the one I've been able to get at a value, where Jerry Jeudy is the one people are in love with and will super reach on, because ADP he's 27, so he's basically right in line with Sutton, but we all have Jeudy ranked lower. 34 for me, 31 Neil, 29 for you, Mike. So we're all basically behind Jeudy, but ADP loves him.
The ECR also has him at 26, so ECR also likes him a little more than we do.
Yeah.
I think a big part of that is I see a better or a more likely outcome of Sutton not only just being the number one wide receiver on the offense, but having that big season in comparison to Jeudy having a solid, good season, but not really going off type player. Which is weird, because a lot of time, like when Jeudy and Sutton have been on the field together, Jeudy has outperformed him. Kinda. Like, he's been out targeted, he's caught more balls. So he's played better, or been at least more of the focal point on the offense.
Right.
It's just, I think that all of these point to like Sutton.
Yeah. Like I said, I feel like, to me, if I'm trying to compare the two, that's really what it is. The volume is going to be more of the DK Metcalf role, and that's going to be Jerry Jeudy in this offense. He's going to get the targets. He should probably lead the team in targets, but Courtland Sutton should lead the team in yards and touchdowns. Like, he's the bigger body. He's the red zone threat. He's going to have the deep balls downfield. So he could only have like 3 catches in a game, but it could be Tyler Lockett. It could be 3 catches for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. Whereas, Jeudy could get 10 targets and catch 7 of them, but only have like 45 yards on the day. So it's all about volume for Jeudy, staying healthy and being a target monster. And for Sutton, I think it's all about production and his ability to catch the ball when it's, catchable for a change. The other one's Tim Patrick. So Tim Patrick has had bursts here and there of being a streamer on a week in, week out basis. How do you guys feel about Tim Patrick this season?
In terms of real football, this is another one similar to them bringing back Melvin Gordon. Having Tim Patrick as your wide receiver 3 in terms of real football, pretty great, especially because they were smart enough to lock him down before the whole wide receiver market blew up.
Right.
So that's phenomenal. In terms of fantasy football, it becomes difficult to get him past the mid-50s when you're actually sitting down and ranking guys, because he's effective when he's out there, but he is very much the third man in the pecking order. And he's almost like the fill-in for Jerry Jeudy if something was to go wrong. He works the middle, he works the inside, whereas KJ Hamler would be the guy that would be doing Courtland Sutton's job in the event that ever had to change, and theoretically he could stay healthy himself. So you get into a situation with Tim Patrick where, as far as real football, fantastic. As far as fantasy football, he has a cap on his upside, but he has proven to be very reliable with the work that he does get. So to me, he's almost the rare wide receiver handcuff. Very rare, but they do exist.
If you're taking a chance on these wide receiver 3s and these late round players in general, you're looking at, the wide receiver 2 on a poor offense, just a Texans or something like that type offense, where this offense is not going to be high power, it's not going to score a lot of points. Or you're looking at the wide receiver 3 of a higher powered offense connected to a great quarterback. It's like 101 fantasy football. Take the upside there, just enjoy it. In the few games that, whether, as we said with Sutton and Jeudy, both are not exactly clean bills of health throughout their careers, if either one gets hurt, Patrick is going to easily slide in and be startable every week.
Yep. and right now he's going in the 14th round. So
exactly.
Great insurance policy to get for virtually nothing. Is it finally time for the Albert Akui-Bunam show? Is it his time to shine? As part of that trade, some of the throwback to Seattle that nobody else wanted, the garbage that was included, was Noah Fant. Again, I mentioned that O.J. Howard was the boy that never could. I think Noah Fant also really fighting for that
He's
title.
still too young. We have to give that a couple more years, but he is trending that direction.
They're becoming like a small boys gang of boys that never could.
Yeah, exactly. But Albert Akui-Bunam was a 4th-round pick a couple years ago of the previous regime. So he's going into his 3rd season. He's now the theoretical tight end 1, but everything we're hearing out of camp is that he's really getting pushed by Greg Dulcich. Like, he was my number 2 tight end in this class coming out of UCLA, 3rd-round pick. He's a natural receiver. He played a lot in the slot. Over his final 2 seasons at UCLA, 19 games, he had 1,242 yards and 10 touchdowns, 6 targets per game, 18.3 yards per reception. He was putting up wide receiver numbers and being used as a wide receiver, and he's basically another threat. Now, again, rookie tight end doesn't matter. We don't care about rookie tight end at all from a fantasy perspective. The only reason I'm interested in it at all here is simply because, is he good enough to push Albert O out of startable tight end range?
He's definitely good enough to drop Albert O in my rankings. Because if you were on a long enough timeline before this whole news cycle has kind of started and the camp and everything, Albert O was creeping up in the ECR to top 10 tight end, which again doesn't mean anything, but he was about 12. He's been coming down, and he's also been coming down my individual rankings. The issue with Albert O has always been, can he stay healthy?
Yeah.
Can he actually get on the field and stay healthy? Because you mentioned he's coming into 3rd year. Well, he was year cut short last year because he got hurt in camp, and then the year before that he was dealing with injuries, and it's a question of whether or not he could actually be healthy enough to actually do what people are projecting him to do. Whereas Dulcich is proving to be, they're very high on him. They just cannot stop raving about everything he's been doing in camp and through mini camp, and he's getting all the right keywords. So for me, I think it's enough to where it throws a little bit more cold water on the Alberto thing, even more than the injury history did, to the point that now you can look at it one of 2 ways. I was not comfortable with him going in the tight end 12 range, and I'd be a hard punt. But if you're telling me that he's going to fall down into that lovely range that we seem to like, where it's I've missed on all the tight ends, maybe I can just grab one at the very end of my draft. If he falls that far, suddenly I'm back in, baby.
Yeah.
I'm back in.
Now, it's settled. So right now, he's tight end 17, going in the 14th round. Of ADP. So
getting closer to where I'm willing to take a lottery ticket on it.
And again, the only reason this is a real discussion now, more so than before, is Russell Wilson made Will Dissly a usable fantasy tight end on a weekly basis. So,
oh no,
anybody can be a usable tight end with Russell Wilson at quarterback.
And as we had said, crazy athlete, both Akui-Bunam and Dulcich. But Dulcich, but Akui-Bunam was one of the most efficient players in the NFL last year among tight ends.
Yeah.
Like top 5, top 6 among all of them. Whenever he actually got the chance to be on the field and he got the targets, he made big plays with them or he caught touchdowns. So if you're looking at that, that's a huge upside to have as our late round type tight ends that we like to take a risk with and wait on. And the only reason he's a little bit lower on my rankings is because of all this story about Dulcich coming out and being this is one of their draft picks. It was a relatively early draft pick, being a 316. That's not bad. That's not a bad pick. So they obviously love him. Even if this becomes a committee at tight end, it just becomes a headache and an aggravation.
Defense and kicker. Defense, I've never been super high on the Broncos defensively anyway. I have them at 16. They're going top 10 right now in ADP. But again, mostly they're talented. They should be good, but that AFC West, man.
There's your problem.
6 games, you basically can't start the Broncos defense. That right there has me out.
Unless EZR has them at 5, and I thought that was crazy given the schedule. They're
got him at
16.
Unless you're okay streaming tight end or streaming defense on a weekly basis, then I'm not going for the Broncos. You got better options. However, I do have Brandon McManus in the top 5. He's in that upper tier of kicker for me. You're playing at Mile High. He's got the long leg. He can consistently hit from 50 plus. So,
the coaching staff historically will let him rip it from 60 when they're at home, especially. Don't give him those opportunities.
So I'm good with McManus, but that's pretty much it. Any final notes on Denver?
No, I was going to make a joke about how they couldn't get the naming rights, but then they named it Empower Fields, and they turned down the hilarious bid that it should have won. But that's so inappropriate that we'll leave it for another day on an NSFW show. Good. So, Mike, what do you got? Take us home.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think there's much else. We've already had a crazy episode at this point. So
yes, I think we're good. All right, so we will be back tomorrow with Detroit. Remember, you can sign up patreon.com/importantnonsense, and you can get these videos 2 days early if they're helping you out. Also, make sure you're liking, subscribing to the YouTube channel, checking out all that stuff. We really appreciate it. And until tomorrow, just keep up the nonsense.
I'm Tim Kitzer from NBA Jam and NFL Blitz, and you can find all the guys at ImportantNonsense.com. Kaboom!